He's coming.
Hey, look at me.
You know, folks, they say that evil flourishes when good men do nothing, but I've learned that sometimes evil flourishes simply because it's wearing a mask so perfect, so polished, that you invite it in for dinner and thank it for passing the salt. My name is Marcus Thorne, and for 15 years I worked as a fraud investigator for one of the biggest insurance firms in Atlanta. I spent my days looking at people who claimed they slipped on a wet floor or lost a diamond ring, and I learned to spot a liar from 100 paces. I thought I had seen the bottom of the barrel when it came to human greed. I thought I knew exactly how dark the human heart could get when money was on the table. But I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong, and it took a rainy Tuesday night in October and a wrong turn down a forgotten road to show me that I didn't know the half of it. It was one of those storms that feels personal, you know? The kind where the rain isn't just falling, it's being thrown at the windshield in angry, grey sheets. I was driving my old Ford Explorer, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of ash, trying to navigate through a downpour that turned the world into a blurred watercolor painting. I was tired. Bone tired. I had spent all day arguing with adjusters and I just wanted to get home to my daughter, Chloe. She's 13, going on 30, and she was probably waiting by the window wondering why her old man was late again. Usually, I take the interstate, but construction had the whole westbound side backed up to the county line, so I made a snap decision. I took the exit for Old Mill Road. Now, if you're not from around here, Old Mill Road is basically a strip of cracked asphalt that cuts through miles of dense pine forest and abandoned farmland. There are no streetlights, no houses for miles, just trees and shadows and the occasional deer with a death wish. It's the kind of road where cell service goes to die. I was leaning forward, squinting through the wipers that were fighting a losing battle against the deluge, cursing under my breath. I remember glancing at the clock on the dashboard. It was 6:15 p.m. The sun had gone down early because of the storm, and the headlights were cutting narrow tunnels through the black rain. I was doing maybe 30 miles an hour, crawling along, when I saw it. At first, my brain didn't want to process what my eyes were seeing. It looked like a trick of the light, a pale, stationary shape on the muddy shoulder of the road. I thought maybe someone had dumped an old refrigerator or a pile of trash. But as I got closer, the shape resolved into something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. It was metal. It was chrome. And it was a person. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV fishtailing slightly on the slick gravel before coming to a halt. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I threw the gearshift into park and jumped out into the storm without even grabbing my jacket. The rain hit me like a physical blow, instantly soaking my shirt, but I didn't care. I ran toward the figure, shouting over the roar of the wind. Hey, are you okay? When I reached her, I froze. Sitting there, in a high-end, custom wheelchair sinking slowly into the mud, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24. She was wearing a thin cardigan that was completely soaked, her blonde hair plastered to her skull, her head hanging low like a puppet with its strings cut. She was shaking so violently that the wheelchair was rattling. Miss. I reached out and touched her shoulder, and she flinched so hard she almost fell out of the chair. She looked up at me, and I will never, as long as I live, forget the look in her eyes. They were hazel, wide, and filled with a terror so raw it felt like looking into an open wound. She didn't look relieved to see me. She looked like she thought I was the executioner coming back to finish the job. Please, she rasped, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Please, don't hurt me. Just let it happen. I ain't gonna hurt you, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of adrenaline and rage at whoever left her there. I'm getting you out of this. I'm getting you warm. I didn't wait for permission. I couldn't. She was turning blue. I scooped her up in my arms. She was terrifyingly light, frail, like she was made of hollow bones, and I ran back to the truck. I got the passenger door open and settled her into the seat, cranking the heater up until it was blasting full force. I ran back for the wheelchair, folded it up. It was heavy, expensive, not the kind of thing you just lose, and shoved it into the back. When I got into the driver's seat, I was dripping wet, breathless, and staring at a girl who was pressing herself against the door panel, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. We need to get you to the hospital, I said, reaching for my phone. You're hypothermic, we need to. No. She screamed it. It was a primal sound. She lunged forward and grabbed my wrist with ice-cold fingers. No hospitals. You can't. Please, sir, if you take me to a hospital, they'll find me. They'll know they failed. They'll come back and finish it. I stopped. The investigator in me, the part of my brain that had spent 15 years analyzing human behavior, clicked on. Victims of accidents beg for doctors. Victims of crimes beg for safety. This girl wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of being found. Okay, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, holding my hands up where she could see them. Okay. No hospital. But you are freezing to death, and I can't leave you here. I'm taking you to my house. It's warm, it's safe, and nobody knows where it is but me and my daughter. Is that okay? She hesitated, her teeth chattering, searching my face for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded, collapsing back against the seat. Okay. I put the car in drive and started heading home, and for the first 10 minutes, the only sound was the heater fan and her jagged breathing. I poured her a cup of coffee from my thermos. It was lukewarm, but she drank it like it was the nectar of the gods. I'm Marcus, I said softly. Sophie, she whispered. My name is Sophie. All right, Sophie. You want to tell me how you ended up on the side of Old Mill Road in a monsoon without a coat? She stayed silent for a long time, staring out the window at the passing trees, and then, slowly, haltingly, she started to talk. And the story she told me was so twisted, so cold-blooded, it made the storm outside look like a gentle spring shower. Sophie Vance, no relation to me, just a coincidence, was the only daughter of Robert Vance, a real estate mogul who owned half the commercial property in the county. Sophie had been a gymnast, a star athlete, until a car accident when she was 15 took the use of her legs. Her dad had been her rock, her best friend, dedicating his life to making the world accessible for her. But Robert had a blind spot named Lydia. Lydia was his second wife, a woman who looked like she stepped out of a magazine and had a heart made of jagged glass. She came with a son, Trent, a guy my age who had never worked a hard day in his life. For years, they played the part. They smiled at family dinners, they pushed Sophie's chair, they acted like the loving stepfamily. Dad died 3 weeks ago, Sophie said, a fresh tear sliding down her cheek. A massive stroke. He was gone before he hit the floor. At the funeral, Lydia held my hand. She told me we were in this together. But then the will was read. Robert Vance might have been blinded by love, but he wasn't stupid with his money. He knew Lydia and Trent burned through cash like it was oxygen. So, he left them a stipend, $50,000 each. A slap in the face. The rest of the estate, the mansion, the portfolio, the classic cars, everything totaling nearly $6 million, was left in a trust for Sophie to ensure her care and comfort for the rest of her life. $6 million, I muttered, gripping the wheel. That's a hell of a motive. They told me we needed a break, Sophie continued, her voice trembling. Lydia said we should go to a spa in the mountains. A family healing trip. Just the three of us. I wanted to believe them, Marcus. I was grieving. I was lonely. I wanted a family. She described the drive. How Trent took the exit for Old Mill Road, claiming it was a scenic shortcut. How he pulled over, claiming the engine was overheating. How they suggested she get out to stretch, to smell the rain, to see the view. They lifted her out. They set her chair in the gravel. Lydia leaned down, Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. She smoothed my hair. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Goodbye, Sophie. Say hello to your father for us." And then they got back in the car. I felt bile rising in my throat. They just left you. Trent looked in the rearview mirror, she sobbed. I saw his eyes. He smiled. He actually smiled as they drove away. I screamed for them. I screamed until my throat bled. I sat there for 4 hours, Marcus. 4 hours waiting to die. I pulled into my driveway, the anger inside me so hot I was surprised the windows didn't fog up. I looked at this girl, this young woman who had been discarded like trash by the people who were supposed to protect her, and I made a vow right then and there. They weren't going to get away with this. Not on my watch. I carried her inside. My daughter Chloe looked up from her homework, saw a soaking wet, paralyzed stranger in my arms, and didn't even blink. Chloe is 13, but she has the soul of an ancestor. She immediately went into caretaker mode, grabbing blankets, running a warm bath, making tea. We got Sophie dried off, dressed in some of my late wife's old sweats, and settled on the couch. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I sat up with Sophie. She was terrified. She was convinced that if we went to the police, Lydia would spin it. "You don't understand," Sophie said, clutching the mug of tea with both hands. She's charming. She's manipulative. She'll say I ran away. She'll say I was crazy with grief. She's been planting seeds for years that I'm unstable." I walked over to the TV and turned on the local late-night news. And there it was. The lead story. Lydia Vance, looking impeccable in black, standing next to a Samba Trent. They were holding a press conference on their front lawn. "Our beloved Sophie is missing," Lydia cried into the microphones, her performance pitch perfect. She was distraught over her father's passing. We stopped at a rest area on Highway 85, and she rolled away. "We've been searching for hours. Sophie, if you can hear this, please, we love you. Come home." Sophie let out a small, strangled sound of despair. "See? They've already written the story. Highway 85. That's 50 miles from where you found me. Who is going to believe me over them? I'm just the paralyzed, grieving daughter. They're the respectable family." I turned off the TV and sat down across from her. I looked her dead in the eye. "Sophie, look at me. I spent 15 years catching fraudsters. I spent 15 years watching arrogant people think they could outsmart the truth. And I learned one thing. Liars always make a mistake. Always. Because they think they're smarter than everyone else. They create a story, but they forget the details. They forget the footprints." "What footprints?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "They said they were at a rest stop on Highway 85, I said, my mind already racing, connecting dots, pulling threads. "But you said they dumped you on Old Mill Road around 2 p.m., right?" "Yes." "And I found you at 6 p.m. That's a 4-hour gap. If they drove away from Old Mill Road, they had to go somewhere. They had to get gas. They had to buy a soda. They had to be seen." I stood up and grabbed my laptop. I still have my credentials from my investigator days. I can't access everything, but I can access enough. "Sophie, I need you to log into your father's banking app. If the estate is in probate, Trent and Lydia might still be using the family cards." She hesitated, then nodded. She typed in the password with shaking fingers. We pulled up the transaction history for the family account, the one Trent used for his allowance. I scrolled through the day's charges. Lunch at a diner, a coffee shop, and then, there it was, a charge for $45 at Bo's Stop and Shop. Timestamp, 2:15 p.m. "Where is Bo's Stop and Shop?" Sophie asked. I pulled up a map. It's a dusty little gas station on the corner of Route 9 and Old Mill Road. It is exactly 2 miles south of where I found you. I looked at Sophie, and for the first time, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just found the trail. They claimed they were on Highway 85, 50 miles east, searching for you. But at 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes after they dumped you, Trent was buying gas 2 miles away from the crime scene. "We watching, Sophie." But a credit card receipt isn't enough. I need to see their faces. "How?" "Tomorrow," I said, closing the laptop. "I'm going to pay Bo a visit. And we are going to get the one thing Lydia and Trent didn't count on. We are going to get the tape." The next morning, I left Sophie with Chloe, who had decided to play hooky from school to stand guard, bless her fierce little heart, and I drove out to Bo's Stop and Shop. The rain had cleared, leaving the world scrubbed clean and bright, a stark contrast to the darkness of the night before. Bo's was one of those places that time forgot, a building that was more rust than paint, with a clerk behind the counter who looked like he'd been there since the Nixon administration. I walked in, flashing my old badge. It's a grey area, I know, but when you're hunting monsters, you don't worry about stepping on the grass. I told the clerk I was investigating a credit card dispute involving a stolen vehicle. It wasn't entirely a lie. They had stolen Sophie's life, hadn't they? "I need to see footage from yesterday afternoon," I said, leaning on the counter, using my best don't mess with me voice. "Between 2 o'clock and 2:30. The clerk grunted, tapped a few keys on a dusty computer, and spun the monitor around. Help yourself. I scanned through the timestamps. 2:10, 2:12. And then, at 2:15 p.m., a silver Mercedes SUV rolled into the frame. My heart kicked against my ribs. It pulled up to pump 4. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Trent. He looked relaxed. He was wearing a polo shirt and sunglasses. He stretched his arms over his head, yawning, looking like a man without a care in the world. He started pumping gas. Then, the passenger door opened. Lydia stepped out. She looked impeccable, not a hair out of place. She walked into the store, into the very camera angle I was watching, bought a diet soda and a pack of gum, and walked back out. But here was the smoking gun. Here was the nail in their coffin. When they got back in the car, they didn't turn around. They didn't head back toward the woods where they had just abandoned a paralyzed girl. They turned left. They pulled out onto the main road and accelerated, heading toward the interstate, heading toward Atlanta, heading away. They weren't searching. They were fleeing. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. I need a copy of this, I said. The clerk shrugged. $10 for the drive. I threw a 20 on the counter and didn't wait for change. I drove home with the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. When I walked in the door, Sophie was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, looking pale and small. Chloe was brushing her hair. We have it, I said, holding up the drive. We have everything. We didn't go to the police station alone. I called David, an old friend from law school who specialized in criminal justice and hated bullies even more than I did. We met at the precinct. When the detective, a guy named Miller who looked exhausted, saw the footage, his eyes went wide. He watched Trent laughing at the pump. He watched Lydia sipping her soda. He looked at the timestamp. Then he looked at the sworn statement Lydia had filed claiming they were 50 miles away at that exact moment, frantically searching for their daughter. Son of a... Miller muttered. He stood up. Get a judge on the line. I want warrants. Now. They arrested them that afternoon. It was beautiful. Lydia was at her country club, having lunch with her grieving friends. Trent was at the gym. The news cameras were there. David had tipped them off. Poetic justice, if you ask me. And the look on Lydia's face when the cuffs clicked onto her wrists wasn't sadness. It was pure, unadulterated shock. She looked at the officer like he was speaking a foreign language. Do you know who I am? She screeched as they shoved her into the patrol car. Yeah, the officer said, closing the door. You're the lady who left her kid in the woods. The trial was the hardest part. Not because we lacked evidence, we had plenty, but because Sophie had to face them. She had to sit in that courtroom, in her chair, and look at the woman who had promised to be her mother, the brother who had promised to protect her. Their defense lawyer was a shark. He tried to paint Sophie as unstable, claiming she had set them up, that she had paid someone to film the footage, that she was a drug addict. It was vile. Sophie shrank in her chair, tears streaming down her face. But then, David called me to the stand. I sat there and I told the jury exactly what I saw. I described the rain. I described the cold. I described a girl who was so terrified of her own family that she begged me not to take her to a hospital. And then, we played the tape. We played the grieving mother press conference Lydia gave. And then, side by side, we played the gas station footage from the same day. The courtroom went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. The contrast was sickening. On one screen, Lydia was crying fake tears. On the other, she was buying gum and checking her makeup in the side mirror while her stepdaughter was freezing to death 2 miles away. The jury didn't even need to leave the room, I swear. You could see it on their faces. Disgust. It took them 2 hours to return a verdict. Guilty. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. Abandonment of a vulnerable adult. Fraud. The judge, a stern woman who looked like she wanted to jump over the bench and strangle them herself, didn't hold back. You traded a human life for a bank account, she said, looking down at Lydia and Trent, who were finally showing fear. You were predators of the worst kind. She sentenced them to 20 years each. No parole for at least 15. When the gavel banged, Sophie didn't cheer. She just let out a long, shuddering breath, her hand gripping mine so hard her knuckles turned white. It's over, she whispered. But life doesn't just reset when the bad guys go to jail. Sophie had a mansion now. She had $6 million. She had her father's cars. But she couldn't go back there. The house was too big, too full of ghosts. So, 2 days after the trial, she rolled into my kitchen while I was making coffee. "Marcus," she said, looking nervous. I don't want to live alone. And Chloe, she needs a tutor for math. And this house needs a new roof." I looked at her. "What are you saying, Sophie?" "I'm saying," she smiled, and it was the first real, genuine smile I'd seen on her face. "I want to renovate. I want to add a suite downstairs. I want to build a ramp that doesn't look like a loading dock. I want to stay. If you'll have me." I looked at Chloe, who was grinning from the living room. I looked at this brave, resilient woman who had survived the unthinkable. "Sophie," I said, "you're already family. You ain't going anywhere." And she didn't. She moved in permanently. She used her inheritance to start a foundation for survivors of domestic abuse and abandonment. She turned my bachelor pad into a home, filling it with light and laughter. She and Chloe became inseparable, sisters in spirit, if not by blood. But the biggest surprise wasn't the renovation or the money. It was what happened to me. I had been a widower for 6 years. I had forgotten what it felt like to have a partner. To have someone ask me how my day was and actually care about the answer. To have someone to sit on the porch with and watch the rain without feeling lonely. It was a slow burn. It wasn't like the movies. It was quiet. It was coffee in the morning. It was shared glances over Chloe's head when she was being a teenager. It was the way Sophie would reach out and squeeze my hand when I had a nightmare about the cases I used to work. One evening, about a year after I found her, we were in the backyard. The storm clouds were rolling in again, heavy and purple. Sophie wheeled herself to the edge of the porch, watching the rain start to fall. "You know," she said softly, "I used to be terrified of the rain. I used to hear thunder and feel like I was back on that road." "And now?" I asked, standing beside her. "Now," she looked up at me, her hazel eyes clear and bright, "now I love it. Because the rain is what made you stop. The rain is what brought me here. The rain washed away the life I wasn't supposed to have and gave me this one." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was hopelessly in love with the woman I had saved. Or maybe, the woman who had saved me. I dropped to one knee. Not to check a tire, not to pick something up, but to ask the most important question of my life. "Sophie," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I don't have millions. I come with a teenage daughter and a beat-up Ford Explorer. But I promise you, as long as there is breath in my body, you will never be abandoned again. You will never be cold. You will never be alone." She started crying, nodding her head before I could even get the ring out of my pocket. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, Marcus. 1,000 times yes." We got married right there in the backyard. Chloe was the maid of honor. David was my best man. It wasn't a royal wedding, but it was perfect. And as we danced, me bending down to hold her, spinning her chair on the patio stones, I looked at the dark sky and whispered a thank you. Thank you for the construction on the highway. Thank you for the wrong turn. Thank you for the gut feeling that made me stop. You know, people talk about fate like it's this big, mystical force. But I think fate is just paying attention. It's listening to that little voice that says, look. It's the decision to be inconveniently kind when it would be easier to keep driving. Lydia and Trent? They're sitting in cells right now, probably wondering how their perfect plan fell apart. They forgot the one variable you can't calculate, a good man in a storm. So, I want to ask you folks something, and I want you to really think about it. Have you ever had a feeling, a tug in your gut, to stop and help someone? To turn down a different road? To make a call you didn't need to make? Did you listen to it? Because let me tell you, that intuition isn't an accident. It's an invitation. An invitation to change a life, maybe even your own. If this story touched you, if you believe that justice still exists in this world, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video, and tell me in the comments, what's the one wrong turn you took that led you to something right? I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know who's waiting for you in the rain. Stay safe, everyone.